So let's get to the part that everybody wants to know about, the timing. How did I know the timing? Most of the clues, well, I won't say most, I'll say the majority of the clues that Jesus gave us all throughout the scripture were for those of us who were waiting on the rapture. Most of the clues that we got were designed to make us go study the scriptures in depth, to learn God's word backwards and forwards, to understand God more deeply. They were designed to make us search and research, to pray and to seek, to spend time with God. They were designed to teach us God's feast days and how God operates on His appointed times. A lot of those clues I'm not going to go through in these videos because they're not irrelevant. It just won't do y'all any good because it's not going to help explain anything that y'all are wanting to know, okay? What I am going to do is touch on the basics of the clues that are relevant and show you how we knew that it would be now. The first thing we need to do is look at God's laws. All right, there are several do's and don'ts when it comes to, and I apologize for that glare. Hold on a second. Okay, that's better. There are several do's and don'ts when it comes to the timing issue. All right, we know from God's 7,000 year plan. I'm sorry about the camera acting up. It gets aggravating sometimes. We know from God's plan that there's a 7,000 year timeline. Jesus gets these last 7 years to rule and reign on the, 1,000 years to rule and reign on the earth. All right. The 4,000 years was for the Old Testament. What we're living in right now is this. The 2,000 years for the New Testament, okay? So the first rule of thumb that we're going to have to go by is that we've got to complete 2,000 years. So when we look at the timing of the second coming, it's got to complete 2,000 years. We can't go home before the 2,000 years are up, all right? So that's rule number 1. The second law of God's timing is the law of Shemitas and Jubilees. Now, I'm going to teach y'all a little more about these later on, but we have to follow these rules. The third law of God's timing is that we must follow the cycle of moon menstruation. Now, I'm going to get more in depth about that, and I'm going to show you how these two will work together later on. Now, the fourth rule is that we have to follow the law of seed time and harvest. And the 3 harvest cycles are first fruits, main harvest, and gleanings. And then the last rule we have to follow is that of God's appointed times, namely His feast days that run from Hanukkah to Hanukkah. If you recall, I showed you that paper of the wedding of the Lamb and the birth of a child and how that went through each feast day from Hanukkah to Hanukkah, and how our timeline runs from Hanukkah to Hanukkah, and we're going to put all this together. Now let's look at the first law of completing the 2,000 years. We have the 4,000 years for the Old Testament, 2,000 for the New Testament, and Jesus will return to reign on the earth during the millennial reign for 1,000 years. Now, this can happen either way. He can return after 1,993 years with a 7-year trib and return in the 2,000th year. Or we can complete 2,000 years, have a 7-year trib, and He will return in the 2007th year. Either one of these will work. All right, God left leniency in the Shemitah years and the Jubilee years to where either one of these can work. And I'm going to show you when we get there how and why this will work. It goes all the way back to the fall of Adam. When we look at the fulfillment of the 2,000 years for the New Testament and the completion of those 2,000 years so that Jesus can return, the most influential verse is Psalm 90:10. I'm going to read that for you out of the King James Bible. It says, "The days of our years are 80 years and 10. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away." 80 years and 10. A score is 20 years. So 80 years is 60 plus 10 is 70. So he's saying that they will have 70 years. But if they have the strength, it will be an extra 10 years, okay? Which would be a total of 80. But he said their strength, those extra 10 years, are labor and sorrow. He's referring to birth pains, and we know the birth pains take place in the tribulation period. So what he's saying is those extra 10 years will be for the tribulation period. Here we see a hidden clue to King Hezekiah. Now, some of y'all may recall the story of King Hezekiah where he was going to die, and he prayed and asked God to help him, and God gave him an extra 15 years. Okay? So that's what God is hinting to right here in Psalm 90:10. That it could be anywhere from 70 to 80 years when this takes place. Now, it says, their strength is labor and sorrow. What's he talking about? Their strength. Their strength is labor and sorrow. Their strength. This is important, y'all. Did I spell that right? Yeah. Okay. Who is there and how do we know? There is Israel. Their strength is labor and sorrow. That word labor and sorrow is referring to the tribulation period. Because remember, I told you Jesus compared his second coming to the birth of a child. So when we talk about labor pains or labor and sorrow, we're talking about birth. All right? Jesus compared the tribulation period to birth pains. Now, he said they have 70 years, but if by reason of strength, they would have 80 years. They could get an extended 10 years. How do we know that this is referring to Israel? We know this is talking about Israel because of the tribulation period. Jesus referred to the tribulation as the time of Jacob's trouble. Okay, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. All right, so what he's saying is Israel is going to have 70 years. If by reason of strength they will have an extra 10 years. He's referencing King Hezekiah here. This is going to be very, very, very important when we get to the end. Okay? But he said it is soon cut off. It's soon cut off. That term, cut off, Jesus was cut off. If you look at the prophecies in Daniel, it tells us that Jesus was cut off after 69 weeks. All right, that's another clue. And then he says, it is soon cut off and we fly away. That word fly away is a reference to the rapture. Now, let me show you how this works. Okay, Psalm 90:10 is talking about the nation of Israel. They would be given 70 to 80 years. Then it would be cut off because of the tribulation period, and the raptures would start taking place. Now, Israel became a nation again on May 14th, 1948. If we add 70 years to that, it brings us to 2018. But we have to consider the birthday year. Like I mentioned before, I think I did, the birthday year is 11 months and 29 days. So if I turn 45 on my birthday, I will stay 45 until the following birthday. Okay? That's why we have to add this extra 11 months right here. But he said, if he grants a Hezekiah moment and gives them an extra 10 years, it would go to 2028, 2029. So we're going to start right here just to make it simple. We're going to put 2018 and 2028. All right? Now, there are 3 ways we can interpret this. We can cut off 69 weeks right here and cut off another 69 weeks right here and have a 7-year tribulation period here and here. So we could go from 2019 to 2026, and we could have had the 7-year tribulation right there. But there's a problem with this interpretation. It breaks the first law. It doesn't fulfill the full 2,000 years. Any way you slice it or dice it, it doesn't fulfill the 2,000 years. Now, another way to interpret this verse is that we could have cut off 69 weeks from the end right here and had the tribulation period here from 22 to 28. Now, don't subtract these because you've got to actually count the year. So 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, that's actually 7 years, okay? And I'll show you later how to count the 7 years of the covenant so you don't get confused. But this one will not work either. We know from the patterns of God's timing laws, we know from the Shemitah and Jubilee years, that this would not work either. And I will later show you how we know that 2026 wouldn't have worked, because we know Jesus couldn't have died in that year, and I'll show you how we know. Now, there is a third possible interpretation that does line up with the 2,000 years, and it looks like this, where we will cut it off 69 weeks from 2029 back to 2028, have the 7 years out here to 2034, and this would account for the extra 10 years. However, Jesus gave us another clue in the Gospels that lends itself to all 3 interpretations being correct. Let me show you that clue. This is Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is talking about the end times with his disciples. So it's chapter 24, verses 32 through 34 in the King James Version. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation, the generation that is born when Israel becomes a nation, in other words, those who are born in 1948, that entire generation will not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So he's saying that generation that was born when Israel became a nation in 1948 will not fully pass away until the second coming takes place. And we know that the fig tree represents Israel in Bible prophecy because Adam and Eve covered themselves with fig leaves. So whenever you see fig tree reference in the Bible, in the scriptures, anywhere, it's talking about the nation of Israel. This is why Jesus cursed the fig tree in the Gospels, is because he knew that the nation of Israel was not going to produce any fruit for him. Now let's go to Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. Again, I'm in the King James Version. He spake also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. There again, the fig tree, Israel. And he came and sought fruit thereon, and found none. Then said he unto the dresser of his vineyard, Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down, why cumbereth it the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. So the clue that Jesus gave us is that the fig tree, Israel, did not bear fruit for 3 years, and he gave them 1 extra year to do so. And he said he was going to dung it, and if they didn't bear fruit in that 4th year, he was going to cut it down. Now, this is a reference back to Nebuchadnezzar. You know, he was referred to as a tree that had been cut down. And we know that trees represent men or mankind in the Bible. We know that the tree of life is Jesus. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is Satan. The blind man saw men walking like trees. Okay? When Nebuchadnezzar was cut down, he was put out of his mind for 7 years. This is a reference back to the 7-year tribulation period. Now look what happens. Look what happens to the interpretation of Psalm 90:10 when we go back and we add these extra 4 years. And don't forget the birthday years, okay? We end up with, instead of 2018 to 2029, we got 2023 to 2034. Now let me show you what that does to the interpretation of Psalm 90:10. Now, considering the birthday year and the fact that Jesus made that 3 to 4 year adjustment, look what it does to the interpretations of Psalm 90:10. It makes all of them relevant. It makes all of the possible interpretations work. It didn't work with the original 70 years from 1948. But when you make that 4-year adjustment for the fruit tree, because we know, in the natural, you're not supposed to eat fruit for the first 3 years off of a tree. All right, the 4th year is when you can start eating the fruit. And that's why Jesus made that reference. But it was also to make this adjustment for the Psalm 90:10 interpretations. All of these are possibilities. We have a possible 2026, 2024, 23 into 24, 26 into 27. And I'm going to show you with the Shemitah and Jubilee years when we get there, how all of these could be a possibility in conjunction with the Hezekiah moment. And I forgot to show you this one as well, where we could go 7 years after 2030, okay? It doesn't matter whether the 2,000 years is fulfilled at the beginning of the timeline, the middle of the timeline, or the end of the timeline, as long as we complete the 2,000 years, all right? And it's because of this Hezekiah moment, and I'm going to tell you what that's all about at the end of the study.